Seeds of silence. The city of Ironwood had learned to thrive on whispers. From its cobblestone streets to its gleaming skyscrapers, every corner of this urban sprawl carried the echoes of secrets. The powerful moved like shadows, their influence flowing through boardrooms and back alleys alike. It wasn't corruption in the open. It was the quiet assurance that questions wouldn't be asked, and the people who should have mattered most would remain unheard. Malik Brown's world didn't stretch far beyond his neighborhood. To him, Ironwood was a city of contrasts, a place where bright lights promised opportunity, but the cracks in the pavement told a different story. The basketball court at Franklin High was his escape. At 16, Malik was already a rising star, his lean frame and natural agility marking him as a player destined for greatness. But destiny had a cruel sense of humor. It was a late autumn evening, and the air carried the first bite of winter. Malik's sneakers echoed on the worn wooden floor of the high school gym. His best friend, Jamal Carter, was struggling to keep up. At 15, Jamal wasn't as tall or as quick, but his determination often made up for what he lacked in skill. "Man, you're gonna need a forklift to get past me one day," Jamal joked, swiping at the ball as Malik spun past him for a clean layup. "Maybe," Malik grinned, catching the ball as it bounced off the rim. "But until then, you might want to work on not tripping over your own feet." Their laughter filled the gym, a rare reprieve from the harsh realities that waited beyond its doors. Both boys knew what the world expected of them: to keep their heads down, stay out of trouble, and accept that the odds were stacked against them. As they packed up to leave, the faint hum of sirens drifted through the open windows. It was a sound as familiar as the creak of old floorboards, a reminder that Ironwood streets were often a battleground. "You heading home?" Malik asked, slinging his gym bag over one shoulder. "Yeah," Jamal said, glancing at his phone. "But first, I gotta pick up something for my mom. She's been working double shifts again, and she's too tired to cook." "Corner store." Malik nodded. "Let's go. Mr. Daniels might still have some of those barbecue chips you like." The two boys walked in companionable silence. Ironwood's streets were quiet at this hour, but the stillness wasn't peaceful, it was watchful. Malik felt it in the way the streetlights flickered, their pale glow revealing more shadows than light. As they approached the corner store, something caught Malik's eye. A black sedan idled across the street, its windows tinted so dark that the occupants were invisible. A man in a crisp gray suit leaned against the car, speaking into a phone. His posture was relaxed, but there was a sharpness to his movements, like a coiled spring waiting to snap. "You see that?" Malik whispered to Jamal, nodding toward the man. "Yeah," Jamal replied, frowning. "Doesn't look like he's here for snacks." Before Malik could respond, the door to the corner store burst open. A figure in a ski mask sprinted out, clutching a small brown package. The masked man moved with precision, darting into a nearby alley without so much as a backward glance. Malik and Jamal froze, their breath visible in the cold night air. The man in the suit didn't react. He remained where he was, his phone pressed to his ear, as though the scene had been part of a script he already knew. Moments later, the wail of sirens shattered the quiet. Two police cruisers screeched to a halt, and officers poured out, their weapons drawn. On the ground, one officer shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. Malik's hands shot up instinctively. "We didn't do anything," he called out, his voice trembling. The officers didn't seem to hear him. Their focus was laser-sharp, and it landed squarely on Malik. "That's him," one of them barked. "Bag him." "What?" Malik stumbled backward, but there was nowhere to run. In seconds, he was tackled to the ground, the impact driving the air from his lungs. Rough hands yanked his arms behind his back, cold steel snapping against his wrists. Jamal tried to intervene, but another officer shoved him aside. "Stay back, kid, unless you want to join him." "He didn't do anything," Jamal shouted, his voice breaking. "We were just—" "Shut up," the officer snapped. From his vantage point on the ground, Malik caught sight of the man in the suit. Their eyes met, and for a split second, Malik thought he saw a flicker of satisfaction in the man's expression. Then the Satan pulled away, its engine humming softly as it disappeared into the night. "Wait," Malik gasped, his voice muffled against the pavement. "You've got the wrong guy." The officers ignored him, dragging him to his feet and shoving him toward the patrol car. Jamal watched helplessly as the door slammed shut, his best friend now just a shadow behind the glass. Back at the station, Malik sat in a cold, gray cell, his mind racing. Questions clawed at him like wild animals. Why had they targeted him? Who was the man in the suit? And what was in the package that had caused such chaos? Meanwhile, Jamal returned home, his thoughts a storm of fear and anger. His mother, Carla, was waiting in their tiny kitchen, her apron dusted with flour from a long shift at the bakery. "What happened to you?" she asked, noticing his pale face and trembling hands. "They arrested Malik," Jamal blurted out. "They think he robbed the store, but he didn't do it. I saw everything." Carla's expression hardened. "We'll figure this out, baby," she said, wrapping him in a tight hug. "But you gotta be careful. These people, they don't play fair." Jamal nodded, but he couldn't shake the image of the man in the suit. He knew deep down that Malik's arrest wasn't random. Someone had orchestrated it, and they had made one critical mistake. They hadn't counted on a quiet 15-year-old who believed in justice. As Jamal lay awake that night, staring at the cracks in his bedroom ceiling, a plan began to form. If the system was rigged, he'd have to find another way to fight. Malik's life depended on it, and Jamal wasn't about to let his best friend down. Whispers of truth. The following morning, Jamal sat at the small wooden desk in his bedroom, surrounded by printouts, scribbled notes, and his buzzing phone. He hadn't slept. Every detail of Malik's arrest replayed in his mind like a loop he couldn't shut off. The sirens, the man in the suit, the silent warning in his cold stare. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Kayla, one of their classmates who had seen the arrest from her apartment window. "I think I got something. Meet me at the library after school." Jamal responded with a quick thumbs-up emoji. He wasn't sure what Kayla had, but any lead was better than sitting at home feeling helpless. Downstairs, Carla was making breakfast, her movements heavy with worry. The small radio on the counter played the morning news, the cheery voice of the anchor at odds with the grim headline. "Teen arrested in armed robbery. Police crack down on local gang activity." "They're already painting him guilty," Carla muttered, turning the volume down as Jamal entered the kitchen. "You think Malik's parents heard this yet?" "They'll hear it," Jamal replied, sinking into a chair. "It's all over the place." His mother set a plate of eggs and toast in front of him, but he couldn't eat. The knot in his stomach had only grown since the night before. "I'm going to figure this out, meh," he said finally. "I don't know how yet, but Malik didn't do it, and I'm not gonna let them ruin his life." Carla hesitated, her hand lingering on his shoulder. "Just be careful, Jamal. You know how this city works. The people with power, they don't like being questioned." After school, Jamal made his way to the public library, his steps quick and purposeful. The library was a relic of Ironwood's past, with its towering shelves and faded carpets. It wasn't a place many teenagers hung out, but that made it perfect for a quiet meeting. Kayla was waiting at a back table, her laptop open in front of her. She was a tech whiz, known for her skills in cracking into locked systems and pulling information most people couldn't access. Her braids were pulled back into a ponytail, and her face was lit by the glow of the screen. "You're late," she said, not looking up as Jamal sat down. "Didn't know this was a job interview," Jamal shot back, but his tone was flat. He leaned forward. "What'd you find?" Kayla clicked through a series of files. "I hacked into the store's security cameras," she said, her voice low. "The footage from last night was wiped, completely erased." "Wait, what?" Jamal frowned. That doesn't make sense. Who wipes security footage after a robbery? Exactly, Kayla said. Whoever did it knew what they were doing. But I found something else. She pulled up a still image from a different camera, one mounted on a nearby lamppost. The grainy photo showed the man in the suit standing by his car, just as Jamal had seen him. That's him, Jamal said, his heart racing. The guy who was there when it all went down. Kayla nodded. He's important, whoever he is. I ran a reverse image search, but nothing came up. He's a ghost. Jamal stared at the screen, his mind racing. We have to show this to someone. The police, maybe. Kayla snorted. The same police who tackled Malik like he was some kind of criminal. Good luck with that. She had a point. Jamal knew better than to trust the cops in Ironwood. They had a reputation for protecting their own, and for turning a blind eye when the powerful were involved. What about a lawyer? He asked. Kayla hesitated. Maybe. But lawyers cost money, and Malik's family isn't exactly swimming in it. Jamal sat back, frustrated. So what do we do? Just sit on this and hope someone else figures it out. Kayla shook her head. Not exactly. There's a reporter, Sarah Connolly. She's been digging into corruption in Ironwood for years. If anyone can use this, it's her. That night, Jamal sat at the edge of his bed, staring at Sarah Connolly's contact info on his phone. Her email address was easy to find. She'd written dozens of exposes about the city's dark underbelly, each one shining a light on the people who thought they were untouchable. Typing out a message felt like crossing a line he couldn't uncross. But every time he hesitated, he thought about Malik sitting in a cell, accused of a crime he didn't commit. Finally, he hit send. The next day, Jamal got a response. Meet me at 3 p.m. Java Junction Cafe. Come alone. When Jamal arrived, the cafe was mostly empty, its worn booths and faded decor giving it a quiet, almost forgotten feel. Sarah was easy to spot. A woman in her late 30s with short-cropped hair and piercing blue eyes. She wore a leather jacket over a plain black shirt, and her notebook was already open on the table in front of her. You're Jamal, she said, gesturing for him to sit. You said you have information about Malik Brown's case. Jamal nodded, pulling up the image Kayla had found. He handed her his phone, and she studied the photo carefully. This guy, Jamal said. He was there when Malik got arrested. He didn't say anything, but it felt like, I don't know, like he was in charge. Sarah raised an eyebrow. And you're sure he's connected to the robbery? I don't know for sure, Jamal admitted, but everything about it felt off. The cops showed up too fast. The footage from the store got erased. It's like someone wanted Malik to take the fall. Sarah leaned back, her expression thoughtful. I've been looking into some unusual activity in your neighborhood, she said. Property sales, shell companies, quiet police transfers. It's all connected to a man named Victor Grant. Who's Victor Grant? Jamal asked. A corporate fixer, Sarah explained. He works for the people who don't like their names in the news. If this guy in the photo is one of his associates, it means someone with a lot of power is pulling the strings. So what do we do? Jamal asked. Sarah smiled faintly. We start digging. And we don't stop until we find something they can't bury. That night, Jamal felt something he hadn't felt since Malik's arrest. Hope. For the first time, it felt like they were getting somewhere. But as he walked home, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. Every shadow felt heavier. Every car that passed seemed to slow just a little too much. When he reached his front door, there was something waiting for him. A plain envelope taped to the handle. Inside was a single piece of paper with 3 words scrawled in bold black ink. Stay in line. Jamal's blood ran cold. He looked around, but the street was empty. The threat was clear, but so was his resolve. They wanted him to stay silent. They wanted him to give up. But they'd made a mistake. They'd underestimated him, and Jamal wasn't about to back down. The shadows pushed back. Jamal's hands trembled as he stared at the note in his hand. The black ink seemed to pulse in the dim glow of the streetlight, a stark reminder that his pursuit of the truth had not gone unnoticed. For a brief moment, the weight of fear pressed on his chest, suffocating and heavy. But then his resolve kicked in. If they were this desperate to scare him, it meant he was on the right track. Inside the small apartment, Carla was already at the table, sorting through overdue bills. The soft hum of a news anchor's voice filled the room, recounting the details of another armed robbery across town. "You okay, baby?" Carla asked without looking up. She noticed everything, even his silence. "Yeah," Jamal lied, slipping the note into his pocket. "Just tired." "You've been tired a lot lately," she said, finally lifting her gaze. Her eyes searched his face, concern etched into every line. "You're not getting caught up in something you shouldn't, are you?" Jamal hesitated. Telling his mother about the note would only make her worry more. She didn't need more weight on her shoulders, not when she was already juggling so much. "I'm fine, Ma," he said, forcing a smile. "Promise." She studied him for another moment before nodding. "All right. Just don't do anything reckless, okay? This world doesn't always give boys like you second chances." Jamal nodded, guilt clawing at him. He knew she was right, but staying quiet wasn't an option anymore. The next morning, Jamal met Sarah at her office. Her workspace was a chaotic maze of papers, sticky notes, and whiteboards crammed with names, dates, and connections. At the center of it all was Victor Grant, the mysterious fixer she'd mentioned. "This guy is everywhere," Sarah said, tapping a photo of Grant pinned to the board. "Every major corruption case in Ironwood over the past decade has his fingerprints on it, but he's never been charged with anything. He's smart, careful, and dangerous," Jamal added, remembering the threatening note on his door. Sarah nodded. "That too. But we've got a lead." She pulled up a map on her laptop, marked with red dots. "These are all properties tied to shell companies Grant manages. Most of them are warehouses, but this one," she pointed to a dot near the docks, "is different. It's a private storage facility with security tighter than Fort Knox." "What do you think's in there?" Jamal asked. "My guess," Sarah said. "Evidence, documents, contraband, maybe even proof that Malik was set up. If we can get inside, we might find what we need to blow this wide open." Jamal frowned. "How do we even get close? Won't they have cameras, guards, all that stuff?" Sarah's lips curled into a sly smile. "Leave that part to me." Later that night, Sarah and Jamal sat parked a block away from the storage facility. The facility was surrounded by high fences topped with razor wire, and floodlights bathed the compound in harsh white light. Guards patrolled the perimeter, their movements precise and deliberate. "This is insane," Jamal muttered, watching the scene through binoculars. "We're gonna get caught." "Not if we're smart," Sarah said, her voice calm. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small drone. "This little guy will do the hard part." The drone buzzed to life, its tiny rotors spinning with a soft whir. Sarah guided it up and over the fence, weaving it carefully between the floodlights. Jamal watched on her tablet as the drone's camera streamed a live feed of the compound. "What am I looking for?" Sarah murmured to herself, her eyes scanning the screen. The drone flew over rows of storage units, finally settling on a nondescript building at the far end of the compound. "There," she said, zooming in. A security keypad guarded the door, but what caught her attention was the faint glow of light spilling out from underneath. "Someone's inside," Jamal whispered. "Good," Sarah said. "That means we're in the right place." The drone hovered near a vent, its camera capturing glimpses of movement inside. Two men in suits were sorting through stacks of files and boxes. One of them held up a folder, his voice barely audible through the drone's microphone. "Shred everything connected to 14th Street, the man said. "We can't leave a trace." Jamal's stomach sank. 14th Street, that's Malik's neighborhood. Sarah nodded grimly. "They're cleaning house. If we don't move fast, all the evidence will be gone." The next day, Sarah and Jamal sat in a diner, poring over the footage they'd captured. Jamal's heart raced as they paused on the image of the two men inside the storage facility. One of them looked vaguely familiar. "That guy on the left," Jamal said, pointing at the screen. "I've seen him before." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Where?" "At the police station," Jamal said. "He was talking to one of the officers after Malik got arrested. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now." "Victor Grant," Sarah said, her tone grim. "That's him. And if he's involved, you can bet this goes higher than we thought." Jamal felt a chill run down his spine. "What do we do now?" "We take this to someone who can do something about it," Sarah said. "I've got a contact at the FBI. Agent Martinez. He's been looking into corruption in Ironwood for years. This footage might be the break he needs." 2 days later, Jamal found himself sitting in a sterile conference room at the local FBI field office. Agent Martinez was a sharp-eyed man in his 40s, his suit immaculate and his demeanor calm but intense. "This is serious," Martinez said after reviewing the footage. "If we can connect these men to the shell companies and the corruption network, we've got a case." "But," Sarah prompted, sensing his hesitation. "But it's not enough," Martinez admitted. "We need more. Something definitive. Records, financial transactions, witness testimony." Jamal's jaw clenched. "You mean like Malik's testimony?" Martinez nodded. "Exactly. If he can corroborate what we already have, it'll strengthen our case." "But he's still in jail," Jamal said bitterly. "How's he supposed to testify when they're treating him like a criminal?" "We're working on that," Martinez assured him. "In the meantime, keep digging. Every piece of evidence helps." The pressure mounted over the next week. Sarah and Jamal worked tirelessly, piecing together a web of connections that tied Victor Grant to a sprawling network of corruption. Every breakthrough felt like a step closer to justice, but the threats continued. One night, Jamal found another note slipped under his door. "Last warning. Stop digging." The words were followed by a crude drawing of a gun. Jamal showed the note to Sarah the next morning. "They're getting desperate," she said, her expression hard. "Desperate people make mistakes. We just have to stay one step ahead." But staying ahead was getting harder. Sarah's car was vandalized, her office broken into. Jamal's mother found strangers lingering outside their apartment, their intentions unmistakable. Still, they refused to back down. Finally, their persistence paid off. Late one night, Sarah received an anonymous tip. A truck was scheduled to leave the storage facility at 3 a.m., carrying the last batch of incriminating evidence. If they intercepted it, they might find the proof they needed. "This is it," Sarah said, her voice electric with urgency. "We either get that truck or we lose everything." Jamal nodded, his fear eclipsed by determination. "Let's do it." A game of shadows. The night air was cold as Jamal sat in Sarah's car, his nerves stretched tight. The storage facility loomed in the distance, its harsh floodlights cutting through the darkness. The plan was simple. Follow the truck, document everything, and hand the evidence over to the FBI. Simple in theory, but the weight of what they were about to do made Jamal's stomach churn. "You ready for this?" Sarah asked, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The tension in her voice betrayed her own nerves. "Not really," Jamal admitted, staring at the distant gate. "But if it means helping Malik, I'll do whatever it takes." Sarah nodded, her jaw set. "Stay sharp. We've only got one shot at this." The minutes crawled by as they waited. Jamal kept glancing at the clock, the anticipation making every second feel like an eternity. Finally, the sound of an engine broke the silence. A large box truck rolled out of the compound, its headlights slicing through the gloom. "That's our target," Sarah said, starting the car. She kept a safe distance, letting the truck lead them onto the main road. The truck wound its way through Ironwood, taking back streets and avoiding major thoroughfares. Jamal couldn't help but notice how deliberate the route seemed, as if the driver was trying to avoid prying eyes. They passed through industrial areas, run-down neighborhoods, and finally onto a desolate stretch of road near the docks. "What are they doing out here?" Jamal asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah frowned, her eyes fixed on the truck. "Probably making a handoff. They don't want anything traced back to them." As they followed, Sarah's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and cursed under her breath. "It's Martinez. He's warning us to pull back." "What? Why?" Jamal asked. "Because he thinks they're onto us," Sarah said, gripping the wheel tighter. "But if we stop now, we lose everything." Jamal swallowed hard. "Then we don't stop." The truck slowed as it approached an abandoned warehouse near the docks. It pulled into a side entrance, and the doors rolled shut behind it. Sarah parked a safe distance away, killing the engine. "What now?" Jamal asked. "We wait," Sarah said, pulling out her camera. "They'll have to load or unload something. That's when we get our evidence." They didn't have to wait long. A group of men emerged from the warehouse, carrying boxes into a waiting van. Sarah zoomed in, snapping photos of the operation. Jamal recognized one of the men immediately. It was Victor Grant. "There he is," Jamal whispered, his pulse quickening. "That's him." Sarah nodded, her camera clicking rapidly. "This is good. This is really good." But then something unexpected happened. Another car pulled up, sleek and black with tinted windows. A man stepped out, and Jamal's breath caught in his throat. "It's him," he said, his voice trembling. "The guy from the corner store." Sarah adjusted her camera, capturing the man's face. "Thomas Ward," she muttered. "The fixer." Ward exchanged words with Grant, his posture tense. He handed over a folder, and Grant's expression darkened as he flipped through it. "They're arguing," Sarah said, watching through her telephoto lens. "Something's not going according to plan." The argument grew heated, and for a moment, it looked like Ward might lash out. But then he gestured sharply toward the truck, and Grant reluctantly nodded. The men began loading the boxes back into the truck. Their movements hurried. "They're moving everything," Sarah said. "They know they're exposed." Jamal felt a chill run down his spine. "We have to stop them." Sarah shook her head. "Not yet. We don't have enough. We need to know where they're taking it." Suddenly, one of the men pointed toward their car. Jamal's blood froze. "They saw us," he said, his voice rising with panic. "Stay calm," Sarah said, starting the engine. "We're leaving. Now." The car sped away, but it wasn't long before headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. A black SUV was following them, its engine roaring as it closed the distance. "They're coming after us," Jamal shouted. "I see it," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Hold on." She swerved onto a side street, the tires screeching as the SUV followed close behind. The narrow roads of Ironwood's industrial district became a maze of dead ends and blind turns. Sarah drove like her life depended on it, which, Jamal realized, it probably did. "Call Martinez," Sarah said, her knuckles white on the wheel. Jamal fumbled for her phone, dialing the number with shaking hands. The line rang twice before Martinez answered. "Sarah, what's going on?" he asked. "We're being chased," Sarah said, her voice clipped. "We've got photos, video, everything. But they're not letting us get away." "Where are you?" Martinez asked. "Near the docks," Sarah replied, "heading south." "Stay on the line," Martinez said. "I'm sending backup." The SUV rammed their car from behind, sending Jamal jolting forward. His heart pounded as Sarah fought to keep control of the vehicle. "They're trying to force us off the road," she shouted. Another sharp turn brought them to a bridge spanning a narrow canal. Sarah hit the gas, but the SUV was relentless. It rammed them again, and this time the impact sent their car skidding. "We're not gonna make it," Jamal yelled. "Trust me," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm. She slammed on the brakes, causing the SUV to overshoot the turn. It veered off the road and slammed into a concrete barrier. The sound of crumpling metal filled the air as the vehicle came to a halt, its engine hissing. Sarah didn't wait to see if the occupants were okay. She gummed the engine and sped away, her focus unwavering. "We did it," Jamal said, his voice shaking. "We got away." "Not yet," Sarah said. "We still have to get this to Martinez." An hour later, they sat in the FBI field office, their evidence spread across the table. Martins and his team reviewed the photos and footage, their expressions growing more serious with each passing moment. "This is big," Martins said finally. "This connects Grant, Ward, and the storage facility to the wider network. With this, we can start issuing warrants." "What about Malik?" Jamal asked. "When does he get out?" Martinez nodded. "I'll push for his immediate release. With this evidence, we can prove he was framed." Relief washed over Jamal, but it was tempered by the knowledge that their fight wasn't over. Grant and Ward might be cornered, but they weren't the only ones pulling the strings. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now," Martins said, "we go public. The more light we shine on this, the harder it'll be for them to hide." The next morning, the story broke. News outlets across the city ran headlines exposing the corruption network that had plagued Ironwood for years. Photos of Grant and Ward were splashed across every screen, along with the evidence Sarah and Jamal had gathered. Protests erupted in the streets as people demanded accountability. Malik was released from jail, his name cleared, but the scars of his ordeal lingered. Jamal and Sarah stood by him as he walked out of the courthouse, the weight of the past weeks etched into his face. "This isn't over," Malik said, his voice steady but tired. "They'll come back." "Let them," Jamal said. "We're ready." The edge of justice. The crowd outside the courthouse roared with applause as Malik stepped into the sunlight, flanked by his mother and younger sister. Reporters jostled for position, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing in rapid succession. Malik's release had become a symbol of hope for a community long battered by injustice. But Malik didn't smile. His face was a mask of exhaustion, his eyes scanning the crowd for familiar faces. When he spotted Jamal standing with Sarah and Agent Martinez near the edge of the throng, his expression softened. He broke away from his family and made a beeline toward his best friend. "You did it," Malik said, pulling Jamal into a fierce hug. "You didn't give up on me." "We did it," Jamal corrected, his voice thick with emotion. "And it's not over yet." Sarah placed a reassuring hand on Malik's shoulder. "He's right. We've got the evidence, but the people we're up against aren't going to go down without a fight." Malik nodded, his jaw tightening. "Whatever it takes, I'm not going back to that cell." The celebration was short-lived. As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah received a call from one of her sources. Her face darkened as she listened, her free hand gripping her notepad. "What is it?" Jamal asked when she hung up. "They're moving again," Sarah said grimly. "Grant and Ward. There's a private airstrip outside the city. They're planning to flee." Agent Martinez cursed under his breath. "We'll intercept them. But if they get out of the country—" "They won't," Sarah said, her voice firm. "We can't let them." The drive to the airstrip was tense. Jamal sat in the backseat of Sarah's car, his heart pounding as he tried to process everything that had happened. Malik sat beside him, staring out the window in silence. "You okay?" Jamal asked softly. "No," Malik admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't stop thinking about it. The way they treated me, like I didn't matter. Like my life didn't mean anything." Jamal swallowed hard. "You matter, Malik. That's why we're doing this. To make sure they can't do this to anyone else." Malik nodded, but the haunted look in his eyes didn't fade. Up front, Sarah was coordinating with Martinez over the phone. The FBI had dispatched a team to the airstrip, but their window of opportunity was closing fast. "They'd got a head start," Sarah said, glancing at the rearview mirror. "If they take off before we get there." "They won't," Jamal said, echoing her earlier words. We won't let them. The airstrip came into view as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. The sound of an approaching plane's engines rumbled through the air, a low, menacing growl that set Jamal's nerves on edge. Sarah parked a safe distance away, and the group exited the car, moving quickly but cautiously. Martinez's team was already in position, their vehicles blocking the main entrance to the runway. "There," Sarah whispered, pointing to a small hangar. The doors were open, revealing a sleek private jet with its engines idling. Grant stood nearby, barking orders into his phone, while Ward paced beside him, his hand resting on the grip of a holstered gun. "Backup's in place," Martins said, his voice low. "On my signal, we move." Jamal's breath caught as Ward glanced in their direction, his sharp eyes scanning the shadows. For a moment, it felt like he was looking directly at them. Then he turned back to Grant, muttering something that made the other man's face pale. "They know something's up," Sarah whispered. "We have to act now." Martinez nodded, raising his hand to signal his team. But before they could move, a third vehicle roared onto the scene, screeching to a halt beside the hangar. The doors flew open, and 3 more men in dark suits stepped out, armed and ready. "Reinforcements," Sarah muttered. "Of course." The standoff unfolded in slow motion. Martinez's agents emerged from their vehicles, weapons drawn, while Grant and his men scrambled to shield the jet. Jamal and Malik watched from the safety of Sarah's car, their hearts hammering in unison. "We should go out there," Malik said, his voice tight. "We can't just sit here." "Not yet," Sarah said, keeping her eyes on the unfolding chaos. "We need to wait for the right moment." That moment came sooner than expected. Grant shouted something to Ward, whom nodded, and began sprinting toward the jet. The FBI agents opened fire, their bullets sparking off the tarmac as Ward ducked behind a stack of crates. "They're trying to destroy the evidence," Sarah said, pointing to a crate being loaded onto the jet. "We can't let them," Jamal said, opening the car door before anyone could stop him. "Jamal, wait," Sarah shouted, but he was already running. Jamal's legs moved on autopilot, his fear overridden by a surge of adrenaline. He darted between the crates, keeping low as bullets whizzed overhead. His only thought was to stop that plane, no matter the cost. He reached the crate just as one of Grant's men grabbed it, and without thinking, Jamal lunged. The man stumbled, and the crate tipped over, spilling its contents onto the tarmac. Documents, photos, USB drives, everything they needed to expose the entire operation. Ward spotted Jamal and raised his gun, his face a mask of fury. Jamal froze, his mind racing as he stared down the barrel. "Get away from him," Malik's voice rang out, and before Jamal could react, his best friend tackled Ward to the ground. The gun skidded across the tarmac, and Malik landed a punch that left Ward dazed. Martinez's agents swarmed the area, taking advantage of the distraction. Within minutes, Grant and his men were subdued, their weapons confiscated. The jet's engine sputtered to a halt as the pilot was escorted out of the cockpit. The aftermath was a blur. Jamal sat on the edge of the tarmac, his hands still trembling as he processed what had just happened. Malik sat beside him, a small cut above his eyebrow, the only visible sign of their ordeal. "You okay?" Jamal asked. Malik let out a shaky laugh. "I just tackled a guy with a gun." "So?" "No, not really." Jamal grinned despite himself. "You saved my life." "That's what friends are for," Malik said, his voice soft. Sarah approached, her camera slung over her shoulder. "You two are insane," she said, but there was admiration in her eyes. "And also heroes." "What about the evidence?" Jamal asked. "Did we get enough?" Sarah held up a USB drive. "More than enough. This is everything we need to bring them down." Martinez joined them, his expression grim but satisfied. "We'll be filing charges against Grant, Ward, and everyone else involved. And with this evidence, we'll finally have leverage against the bigger players, maybe even the governor. Jamal felt a wave of relief, but it was tempered by the knowledge that their fight wasn't over. What about the people in the neighborhood? He asked. The ones who've been hurt by all this. Martinez nodded. We'll work on that too. But it's going to take time. The next morning, the headlines told the story. Corruption network exposed in Ironwood. High-profile arrests made. The city buzzed with the news, and for the first time in years, there was a sense of hope in the air. But for Jamal, Malik, and Sarah, it wasn't just about the headlines. It was about the people they'd fought for, the families who'd lost everything, the kids who'd been written off, the voices that had been silenced for too long. Standing on the basketball court where it all began, Jamal looked at Malik and smiled. We did it, he said. Yeah, Malik replied, picking up a ball and spinning it on his finger. But we're just getting started. Shadows strike back. As dawn broke over Ironwood, the FBI headquarters buzzed with activity. Martinez's team was hard at work cataloging the evidence recovered from the airstrip. USB drives, folders, and photos were laid out on long conference tables. The scope of the operation they'd uncovered was staggering. Money laundering, bribery, falsified police reports, and connections to high-ranking officials across the state. Sarah stood with her arms crossed, watching as agents worked. Jamal and Malik sat nearby, still processing everything that had happened the night before. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving them exhausted and bruised, but they were alive. And for the first time, it felt like they were winning. Martinez approached, holding a folder in one hand and his phone in the other. His expression was serious. We've got a problem, he said, setting the folder on the table. What kind of problem? Sarah asked, her voice wary. Grant and Ward aren't talking, Martinez said. They're lawyered up, and their lawyers are good, probably on retainer from whoever's funding all of this. Without their cooperation, it's going to be harder to go after the bigger players. Sarah frowned. We've got the evidence. Isn't that enough? It's enough to convict them, Martinez admitted. But the governor, the rest of the network, we need someone on the inside to flip, someone who can connect all the dots. What about the flight logs? Jamal asked, looking up. That jet wasn't just sitting there for no reason. It was probably used to move people and money. Martinez nodded. We're working on it, but the logs are encrypted. It'll take time to crack them. Jamal exchanged a glance with Malik. The memory of Ward's threat still lingered in their minds. These people weren't just going to sit back and let the FBI dismantle their empire. Backlash. Later that day, Sarah received an anonymous tip. She was sitting in her cluttered office, reviewing her notes when her phone buzzed. The message was short but chilling. You think you've won. Look closer. A moment later, an email arrived with a single attachment. A grainy photo of Sarah leaving the airstrip the night before, Jamal and Malik visible in the background. Her stomach tightened as she stared at the image. Someone had been watching them. Without wasting a moment, she called Martinez. We've got a leak, she said. Someone tipped them off about our operation at the airstrip, and now they're targeting us directly. Martinez cursed on the other end of the line. We suspected as much. There's a mole somewhere, either in our office or in local law enforcement. We're running internal checks, but it's a mess. What do we do? Sarah asked. Stay low for now, Martinez said. We've got agents watching your apartment and Jamal's place. If anything happens, call me immediately. Trouble at home. Meanwhile, Jamal returned home to find his mother, Carla, pacing the living room. Her face was pale, and she held an envelope in her hands. This was in the mailbox, she said, handing it to Jamal. Inside was another note, written in the same bold, black letters as before. We know where you live. Stay out of it. Jamal felt his hands shake as he read the words. He looked up at his mother, whose worry had turned into barely concealed anger. You need to stop, Jamal, Carla said. This is dangerous. These people aren't playing games. I can't stop, Ma, Jamal said, his voice firm. Not now. They've hurt too many people already. If we back down, they'll just keep doing it. And what about you? Carla shot back. What happens if they come after you? Or me? Jamal hesitated, the weight of her words pressing down on him. But before he could respond, there was a knock at the door. Carla froze, her eyes darting to the window. Stay here, she whispered, grabbing a kitchen knife before approaching the door. When she opened it, a young woman stood on the porch, dressed in plain clothes and holding a badge. Mrs. Carter, I'm Agent Diaz with the FBI. I'm here to check on you and Jamal. Carla exhaled sharply, lowering the knife. You scared me half to death, she said, stepping aside to let Diaz in. The agent looked around the small apartment before turning to Jamal. You're not safe here, she said bluntly. We need to move you both to a secure location. What about Malik? Jamal asked. And Sarah? They're being moved too, Diaz said. The people you're up against are powerful, and they're not afraid to retaliate. We can't take any chances. A new plan. The secure location turned out to be a modest motel on the outskirts of Ironwood. Jamal and Carla shared a small room, while Malik and his family were placed next door. Sarah was given her own room, and Martinez's agents patrolled the area 24/7. Despite the precautions, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The conspiracy they were fighting against was like a hydra. Cut off one head, and two more grew in its place. One night, as he sat on the motel bed scrolling through news updates, Sarah knocked on the door. She carried her laptop under one arm and looked more tired than he'd ever seen her. We need to talk, she said, setting the laptop on the small table. What's going on? Jamal asked. Sarah opened a folder on her computer, revealing a series of financial records. These are wire transfers tied to Grant's shell companies. They lead to offshore accounts. But one name keeps popping up. Sullivan Enterprises. Jamal frowned. Sullivan? The governor. Sarah nodded. He's not just a player in this. He's one of the architects. Everything we've uncovered points back to him. Can we prove it? Jamal asked. We're close, Sarah said. But we need more. Something that directly ties him to the operation. If we can get that, we can take him down. The final break. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. One of Martinez's tech specialists managed to crack the encrypted flight logs from the airstrip. The records revealed a series of suspicious trips, including one that stood out, a private flight from Ironwood to a secluded estate owned by Governor Sullivan. That's it, Sarah said when she saw the logs. That's the connection we needed. Martinez nodded. This gives us probable cause to raid the estate. If he's hiding anything, we'll find it. The raid was scheduled for the following night, but Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. Sullivan was too smart, too connected to be caught off guard. They'll be ready for us, he said as he, Malik, and Sarah prepared for the operation. Maybe, Sarah admitted, but so are we. The stage was set for a climactic showdown. As the team geared up for the raid, the tension in the air was palpable. The stakes had never been higher, and the cost of failure was unthinkable. But for Jamal, Malik, and Sarah, failure wasn't an option. The fall of giants. The moon hung low over Ironwood, casting an eerie glow on the city's jagged skyline. At the edge of the state, hidden by a thick wall of forest, stood Governor Sullivan's sprawling estate, a fortress of wealth and power. Tonight, it wasn't just a symbol of corruption, it was a battlefield. Jamal sat in the back of an unmarked van with Malik, Sarah, and Agent Martinez, each of them suited up with body armor and earpieces. The air was thick with tension as the van bumped along the dirt road leading to the estate. Outside, a convoy of FBI vehicles rumbled behind them, their lights off to avoid detection. You don't have to be here, Martin said, his gaze shifting between Jamal and Malik. We've got enough agents to handle this. Jamal clenched his fists. We started this. We're finishing it. Malik nodded in agreement. If this is what it takes to stop them, we're in. Sarah gave them a small, approving smile. Just stick close and don't do anything reckless. We're here to expose the truth, not be heroes. The raid begins. The estate loomed ahead, a massive structure surrounded by tall iron gates and a sophisticated security system. Drones patrolled the perimeter, their red lights sweeping across the grounds. Armed guards in black uniforms patrolled with precision, their movements coordinated and deliberate. Martinez spoke into his earpiece. Teams 1 and 2, move into position. Disarm the drones and breach the perimeter quietly. Jamal watched as shadows darted through the trees. The FBI agents moved like ghosts, neutralizing guards and disabling cameras with precision. Within minutes, the front gate was breached, and the convoy rolled in. "Let's go," Martinez said, gesturing for them to follow. Jamal's heart pounded as they moved toward the main building. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the crunch of gravel under their boots. When they reached the mansion's massive oak doors, Martinez signaled to a tech specialist, who quickly hacked the lock. The doors swung open, revealing a grand foyer with marble floors and a crystal chandelier. The air inside was cold and still, the kind of quiet that felt wrong. "Split up," Martinez ordered. "Search every room. We're looking for anything that ties Sullivan to the operation. Documents, hard drives, anything." A dangerous discovery. Jamal and Malik followed Sarah down a side hallway lined with expensive paintings and statues. Every step felt like walking on eggshells. They knew Sullivan wouldn't leave his secrets unguarded. They entered what appeared to be a study, its walls lined with shelves of leather-bound books. A large mahogany desk sat in the center, its surface cluttered with papers. "Start looking," Sarah said, already rifling through the desk drawers. Jamal opened a cabinet and found files labeled with cryptic codes. He pulled one out and flipped through it, his eyes widening as he recognized the names of local officials and businesses, many of whom had been implicated in their investigation. "Sarah, look at this," he said, handing her the file. She scanned it quickly, her face lighting up. "This is it. This is the smoking gun." Before they could celebrate, a loud crash echoed through the mansion, followed by the sharp crack of gunfire. Jamal froze, his heart leaping into his throat. "They know we're here," Sarah said, grabbing the files and stuffing them into her bag. "We need to move." The trap closes. The gunfire grew louder as they moved through the mansion, weaving through hallways and staircases. The once pristine estate was now a war zone, with bullets shattering windows and splintering furniture. Martinez's voice crackled over their earpieces. "They got reinforcements, heavy resistance in the east wing. We're pinned down." Jamal's stomach churned. "We have to help them." "No," Sarah said firmly. "We stick to the plan. We need to secure the evidence first." They made their way to the mansion's lower levels, following a winding staircase that led to a reinforced door. A keypad blinked red beside it, its screen demanding a code. "This must be Sullivan's vault," Sarah said, pulling out a device from her bag. "Give me a minute." As she worked, the sound of approaching footsteps made Jamal's blood run cold. He and Malik turned to see two guards rounding the corner, their rifles aimed directly at them. "Down," Jamal shouted, diving behind a pillar as bullets ricocheted off the walls. Malik followed, his breath coming in sharp gasps. "We can't let them get to Sarah," Malik said, gripping a heavy vase from a nearby table. "What are you doing?" Jamal hissed. "Buying us time," Malik replied, stepping into the open and hurling the vase at one of the guards. It shattered against the man's head, sending him sprawling. The second guard turned his weapon on Malik, but Jamal acted quickly, grabbing a chair and swinging it with all his strength. The guard went down, and Jamal's arms trembled from the effort. "Are you two insane?" Sarah shouted, finally getting the vault door open. "Get in here now." The vault. Inside the vault, the air was cool and stale, and rows of metal shelves were packed with evidence. Boxes labeled with dates and codes lined the walls, and a table in the center held stacks of cash and documents. Sarah wasted no time, snapping photos and collecting files. Jamal and Malik helped, their movements frantic as the sounds of the battle upstairs continued to rage. "This is everything," Sarah said, her voice breathless. "Financial records, shipment logs, wire transfers, it's all here." Before they could leave, the vault door slammed shut behind them. The heavy clang echoed through the room, and a voice crackled over a hidden speaker. "Impressive," Governor Sullivan's voice drawled, smooth and mocking. "You've caused quite the mess, but it ends here." Jamal's chest tightened as he realized they were trapped. The standoff. Sullivan himself appeared on a security monitor, his image distorted but recognizable. He leaned back in a leather chair, his expression one of calculated arrogance. "You think you've won," he said, "but this is my city, my state. Do you really think anyone will believe the word of a couple of kids and a washed-up journalist?" Sarah stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "We don't need them to believe us, Sullivan. We got your files, your logs, your money trails. It's over." Sullivan chuckled. "You underestimate how deep my roots go. But if you want to play this game, let's see how far you're willing to go." The monitor flickered off, and the vault door began to heat up. Jamal's eyes widened as smoke started to seep through the cracks. "They're going to burn us out," Sarah said, panic creeping into her voice. Jamal's mind raced. He spotted a ventilation grate near the ceiling. "Up there," he said. "It's our only way out. The escape." Using a chair to boost themselves, Jamal and Malik pried the grate open. They helped Sarah climb in first, then followed her into the narrow duct. The heat from the vault was rising, and smoke filled the air as they crawled through the dark, twisting passage. Finally, they emerged into a storage room on the other side of the mansion. They burst out coughing, their lungs burning, but they were alive. "We need to get this to Martinez," Sarah said, clutching her bag tightly. Justice served. By the time they made it back to the main foyer, the FBI had gained the upper hand. Sullivan's guards were subdued, and the governor himself was being led out in handcuffs. His once arrogant expression was replaced by cold fury as he locked eyes with Jamal and Malik. "This isn't over," he hissed as agents dragged him away. "No," Jamal said, his voice steady. "But you are." The aftermath. The evidence from Sullivan's vault was enough to bring down the entire network. Dozens of arrests followed, and Ironwood began to heal. Sarah's exposé made national headlines, and Malik became a symbol of resilience for the community. Months later, Jamal and Malik stood on the basketball court where it all began. The neighborhood was quieter now, safer. The scars of the past hadn't vanished, but they were fading. "We did it," Malik said, spinning a basketball on his finger. Jamal nodded, a small smile on his lips. "Yeah, we did." As the sun set over Ironwood, the two friends played a game of one-on-one, the sounds of laughter and bouncing basketballs filling the air, a reminder that even in the face of darkness, hope could prevail. The light breaks through. The courtroom was packed. Every seat in the gallery was filled, and dozens more stood along the walls, waiting for the day's proceedings to begin. The governor's trial had become a national spectacle, a symbol of the fight against corruption that had gripped Ironwood and beyond. Jamal sat in the second row beside Malik, Sarah, and Carla. The weight of the past months hung heavy on all of them, but there was also a quiet sense of pride. They'd come so far, and this moment was the culmination of their efforts. When Governor Michael Sullivan entered, escorted by U.S. Marshals, a hush fell over the room. His once impeccable demeanor was gone, replaced by a haggard, defeated expression. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Financial records, flight logs, recorded conversations, and testimony from those he'd once controlled. Jamal tightened his grip on Malik's arm as the judge entered. "All rise." The verdict. The trial was long and grueling. Prosecutors laid out every detail of the conspiracy, methodically dismantling Sullivan's defense. Witnesses testified about bribes, intimidation, and the systematic exploitation of Ironwood's most vulnerable communities. The jury listened intently, their expressions growing darker with every new revelation. When Sarah took the stand, she spoke with unflinching resolve, describing how she'd uncovered Sullivan's network and the risks they'd faced to bring the truth to light. Jamal and Malik were also called to testify, recounting their harrowing experiences and the threats they'd endured. Malik's voice cracked as he described his wrongful arrest, but his words were powerful, and the courtroom hung on every syllable. Finally, the jury deliberated. Hours passed, but when they returned, the tension in the room was palpable. The foreman stood, clearing his throat. On the charges of conspiracy, bribery, obstruction of justice, and racketeering, we find the defendant, Michael Sullivan, guilty on all counts. Cheers erupted in the courtroom. Malik's mother hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. Sarah leaned back in her seat, a rare smile breaking across her face. Jamal felt a wave of relief wash over him as he looked at Malik. "It's over," Malik whispered. Jamal nodded. "Yeah, we did it." Healing the community. The fall of Governor Sullivan sent shockwaves through Ironwood. His conviction inspired a wave of reforms, from law enforcement accountability to investments in the city's neglected neighborhoods. Corrupt officials were replaced, and new leadership emerged, committed to rebuilding trust and empowering the community. Sarah's expose earned her national acclaim, but she chose to stay in Ironwood, continuing to shine a light on injustice. Her work inspired other journalists to investigate similar cases across the country, exposing corruption on a broader scale. Malik returned to the basketball court, but he was no longer just a player. He became a mentor to younger kids, teaching them not only how to play but also how to stand up for themselves. His story became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even when the odds seemed insurmountable, change was possible. Jamal, too, found his purpose. With Sarah's guidance, he started a youth advocacy group, working to ensure that no one else would have to face what he and Malik had endured. His voice, once quiet and uncertain, became a rallying cry for justice. A new beginning. Months later, Jamal and Malik stood on the roof of their high school, looking out over the city. The skyline was the same, but something about Ironwood felt different. Lighter, freer. "Think they'll ever try to come back?" Malik asked, referring to the remnants of Sullivan's network. "Maybe," Jamal said. "But now, they know we'll fight back, and they won't win." Malik nodded, a small smile on his face. "Feels good, doesn't it? Knowing we made a difference." Jamal looked at his best friend, the boy who taught him the importance of standing up, even when it was hard. "Yeah," he said, "it feels real good." As the sun set, casting a golden glow over Ironwood, Jamal felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. They had fought for the truth, and though the battle had been long and hard, they had emerged stronger. Together, they had changed their city, proving that even in the darkest shadows, the light could break through.